Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having an awesome start to your Thursday, and we are on the countdown to Christmas. So it's all good, other than Mike, the minus, I don't even know, Phil, 25 degrees, maybe more. But you know what? It is Saskatchewan. So I'm not even going to ask you what your weather is over there. Well, maybe I'll ask you later. So welcome, everybody. Thank you to our for welcoming or joining us on our 21st edition of the Thursday Live. And we are doing it live, but we are taping it. So we hope that you will pass this on to friends and colleagues out there. There's a lot of great information we're going to cover off today with Mike as he joins us. So we will formally introduce him in a wee bit. We do have a few housekeeping items. One of the things that we do want to mention is that there is an ability to ask questions as we go through this. So we'll do our very best to tackle them as we go through the presentation so that you're hitting it when the conversation's warm. If you come up with a conversation or a question after that you want us to follow up on, absolutely bring it back to our attention, and I can make sure that Mike, we circle back to Mike and he can answer those questions for you. Because there's going to be a lot of information that we're going to cover off, and we're going to cover off a little bit to kind of like what we did see happen, what we predicted was going to happen, and certainly what is most important, what people are looking for is predictions going into 2022. So theme for December, merry and bright. So Mike's got his sweater on. Yeah. I've got my sweater on. I don't know if you can tell, but I do have my reindeers on my sleeve. So I've got all the reindeers on my sweater. And I do have my favorite hat at Christmas time. And Mike, did you bring your favorite coffee mug?
No, I didn't do that. I've just got boring water here, but I have Santa. He's going to help us out with the conversation. So there you go.
Perfect. Well, I did bring one of my favorite mugs. I don't know, can we see that? Mike or Phil doesn't let me look at myself on the screen anymore. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, cat mom.
Oh, cat mom. Okay, there you go.
I had 3. Now I'm down to 2, and probably one too many. So I am. Yes, I know. There's a tremendous amount of fur in my house, as Phil will attest. Phil is our IT guy. You want to give a wave? He's helping us out with our technology. And Candace was here and gone, and she helps us out with some of the setup of our events. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I do want to announce, and I'm going to announce it now, and I'm going to certainly address it very quickly at the end. Christmas gifting. The gift of love. This is what we're at right now, and it's Christmas time, and you've always got those friends and colleagues, family members even, that you're not quite sure what to get them because they probably have everything. So I have the perfect gift for you. Care for Kids by Wiegers is doing our event next year, and Mike, you and I will talk a little bit more about that. We are always about having a ton of fun. It's for a very important cause. It's for the Jim Patterson Children's Hospital of Saskatchewan. So we've been dedicated to this cause for many years. And we do an annual, actually an event every 2 years. This year, thank you to COVID, it's going to slip into every 3 years. But we are going to have our event next year in September of 2024. So if you're looking for the perfect gift, I have the perfect gift for you. So I gotta just show you. Obsessed. Can we see that? It's on the screen, Phil, is it?
Yep.
Perfect. So we are going to be selling tickets right away. And it is a comedy cabaret. We focus on using all our local representation, whether it's in Saskatchewan or across Canada, but we certainly want to keep it as local as we can get it. It is going to be a ton of fun. As you can well see, our theme is Dr. Seuss, and it's full on dress up. So you want to have some fun. You want to give some money to a great cause. Please come to our website, our Care for Kids by Wiegers website. You can buy tickets, tables or singulars, and we would love to have you come out. We would love to have you come and be a part to our sponsorship as well. So there's my shameless plug, but it will solve the problem for those people that are difficult to buy for. So that's my plug for you. So let's carry on and get rolling. Mike McClenahan, you know, that's a tongue twister for me. So I call you Mike all the time, and I have to really practice the McClenahan. So I'll forgive you when you call me Deb Wiegers.
Fair enough.
So we've got a really important topic today. As you saw from our website, where we really wanted to get a really closer look to, you know, what's happening in the benefits landscape. It is swiftly changing. There's been a lot of crazy stuff going on. Thank you to COVID. And certainly there is another new one along the way that happened very quickly and rapidly, was that war on talent, shortage of talented labor. And it certainly hit the landscape in a big way. So we've had to do a lot of pivoting, right, Mike, in terms of just what we do in our industry, to share with our clients ways in which they can still remain competitive, to attract and more importantly, retain that great talent. So what we thought we'd do is we would go into predictions that Mike's group, and Mike is VP of Partner Solutions with People Corporations. Part two, I guess you call the marketing arm would be Benefits by Design. He's a strategizer and developer of innovative group products, which is what we love. Helps Canadian and their families stay healthy, happy, and financially secure, which is very important. And I love this, Mike, that you're a big promoter and supporter of the Third Party Administrative Association of Canada, TPAC, because there's lots of great product lines and opportunities that you, as the administrative side of the benefits programs, have brought to the table. So that's fantastic. So to have that voice out in the industry has been very helpful for us at Wiegers Financial, of course. I did have to ask the questions. Mike, just so you know, is from BC. Are you in Port Coquitlam?
Coquitlam. Well, like many of us, I'm working from home these days. So, but yeah, Coquitlam.
But he is in BC area, so he's not having to manage all this cold weather that we're getting right now. Although it is snowing out there, isn't it?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, this whole world is topsy-turvy these days, and if I turn my computer around, which I won't, it is just a whiteout outside right now. So we're a little up the hill, but nonetheless, we've been getting some cool weather, and predictions are we're going to have a white Christmas too. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Well, that's kind of cool.
Although
I like a white Christmas.
As you know, Deb, I will definitely be having a white Christmas because on Tuesday I hop on a plane, hopefully, and my wife's family is all Saskatchewan, Regina areas, so I'm going out and spending the holidays with them.
Wonderful. Well, we'll welcome you to Saskatchewan. Just bring that warm weather back with you.
Yeah, I'll try.
That's my Christmas wish. Yeah. There you go. So big volunteer, Motion Ball. What's Motion Ball?
Yeah, great question. So I've been involved with that organization for over a dozen years. So Motion Ball's sole charity is what's called the Special Olympics Canada Foundation. So without going too deep into it, but it's a great opportunity for individuals and organizations to, much like what you were talking about before, Deb, raise some funds, have some fun, but it's tied in with the Special Olympics movement, which again is helping individuals who have developmental disabilities. And I'll leave you with this. Motion Ball slogan is educate, integrate, celebrate. So work on all three of those components, but our big event every year, which is now I think in around 24 cities across Canada, and I help with the Vancouver event, is what's called the Marathon of Sport. Think of it like sports day for big kids with lack of athletic talent like me. But the neat part is for a day, you're paired up with Special Olympic athletes and you have fun, everything from bocce to a little bit of soccer to whatever. But it's just a great event.
That's great. Well, and I love the fact that you support, different organizations. I know that we really focus on a lot of volunteerism in terms of our company, and our team is really embracing it, and we love doing it. And this time of year, it's very much needed. I know the Friendship Inn is certainly the one that's greatly in need, and we always do our best to support it. And with our clients, we want to make sure that when we're out there doing our Christmas shopping, we're shopping local. Because we know it's important to support our business clients and the community, so that we can all manage through this COVID period and beyond, right? So that's fantastic. I love to hear that. I'm not too much on the athletic side, but I am a big tracker of steps. Just saying, lots of steps.
Yeah,
lots of steps. In fact, I walked to work, and I did have a little frost on my face. It was all good. But so let's go into predictions of 2021. So Benefits by Design has been doing this for the past 3 years. So when you get together, you kind of talk about what are those things that you think are going to happen going into the next year. And then obviously, as you get to the tail end of it, you summarize what actually did happen, and perhaps, and we will see some of the things that will push into the predictions of 2022. So we're going to fast track this. But I want to make sure that, Mike, if there's any quick commentary that you have on any of them, we address that, because we want to spend some time on those 2022 predictions that we're going to see. So number one, I probably could ask the audience, what do you think the number one prediction was for 2021? If they had an answer, they would give it to me, and I'm going to be almost 100% sure they're going to say COVID is here to stay. So COVID's here to stay, and we will see in prediction 2022 that it's still here to stay for a while.
There's one we could all pick that to be wrong on. We wish it had been that one, but yeah.
Well, you know, we all went into this thinking this was a 6-week thing, and then it was a 2-month thing, and a 6-month thing, 2-year thing, and the list goes on, right? So we'll certainly see in some of the predictions how the COVID, unfortunately, there's good and bad, has played into what we're seeing on the outcome of the benefits landscape. So number 2, telehealth and telemedicine, here to stay, 2021. Did you see that one come to be the way you guys had thought it to be?
Yeah, I'd say mostly, but not entirely. So you'd think if anything, COVID and people desiring more access through technology means would have exploded during 2021, and it certainly experienced growth, but maybe not to the degree that we might have expected, because I think there was whether it was getting your prescriptions delivered through some sort of direct delivery as opposed to going to the physical pharmacy, or even things like, and we'll touch on this in the 22 predictions, but accessing things like mental health and cognitive behavioral therapy and so on, being able to do that through like what you and I are doing right now in our audience, and other means. So it certainly grew, and we'll touch on a few things in the later predictions of some interesting areas where technology is sort of changing how plan members access their benefits programs in areas that you might not have thought was possible. Like a teaser, things like physiotherapy or dental work that can, in limited ways, be done through electronic means. So, yeah.
But you folks have actually, you were the first that I saw to promote physio, the physiotherapy app.
Yeah. And that one was interesting. So I'll share the fun story. They came on our radar, I guess, around 2 years ago. And I can remember my visceral reaction being something like, what? Come on. How can it's physio, right? And I'm an avid mountain biker who falls off his bike a lot. So I've had a lot of exposure to physiotherapy. And so anyhow, imagine about 2 years ago, they're explaining their pitch, and no better way to sort of figure out if it actually works than to have a live test case. And it wasn't biking. It was actually about this time 2 years ago at just before COVID, a client's Christmas event up in Kelowna. And we just happened in the wee hours to find ourselves at a country and western bar around midnight that magically this mechanical bull emerged from the floor. And I probably had too much liquid courage and decided to attempt. Yeah. I didn't come close to 8 seconds. But the net result was I wrenched my shoulder in the process. And so I tested out this program, like they used me as a guinea pig later. And I would say it was effective. I think the challenge is it's more what my initial reaction is. Like, I think plan members and Canadians as consumers of these benefit programs would probably initially have a hard time wrapping their heads around that, and even just line of sight accessibility that's available. So we certainly have seen an uptick in the utilization, and there are a number of benefits to that sort of approach, from cost of delivery, convenience, especially during COVID. You don't have to go to a clinic and sit there and worry about, are you being exposed to anything? and I would say, and I didn't perceive this in the beginning, but to me, you don't have to answer this, Deb. Have you ever used physiotherapy services? Okay, so what is, and again, you go back every week until it gets better. So when you go back for your next appointment with your physiotherapist, what is the first thing he or she asks you?
Have you been doing your exercises?
Right. And if you're like me, you kind of tell half truths, right? Yeah, it's like when the dentist asks me.
You think you can cheat your way through that? They know.
Right. Yeah. So, but here's the interesting thing with the digital delivery of this. They know, right? Because what happens is after you do your initial consult with the physiotherapist, who is a licensed physiotherapist in the province, et cetera, then they curate a bunch of videos for you, which are your stretches, your exercises, whatever you're supposed to be doing. But let's say you're supposed to do that every day. Okay. If you don't log in to the platform and do your exercises, it actually pings you with a little friendly reminder, says, hey, we missed you. We noticed you haven't done, so there's that added accountability factor that, you don't necessarily get with the bricks and mortar physiotherapist. Again, a great experience with the bricks and mortar as well, but it's just, you can't embed that kind of follow-up.
I think there's great opportunities to, be participating in people can by choice still do what they need to do. But for some people, the virtual side is really making a huge difference in terms of just being able to integrate it into their life. Right. I mean, we're all very busy people. And we look at actually the one that really impressed me last year when we were interviewing Wello for the telehealth virtual doctors. It was interesting. He said 30 years ago, this was a conversation on the government level and the government never acted on it. And, I asked him why. Right. And he said, well, probably they just didn't have the talent and the expertise and the foresight to be able to take it to the next level. Right. I mean, we're all very traditional people, maybe to some degree. And so comes along COVID and wow, did it accelerate it? I mean, we were already in that space a little bit, but as you well know, like some of the insurers were adopting it a little bit. And it was kind of like a sideline thing. Now, I believe one of my predictions, Mike, will be, it would be very soon. I would like to think within a year that all insurance companies should just embed it into their benefit program. Just have it in the health plan. Because there's no sense having a conversation if you should or shouldn't or want or don't. And by the way, it's an extra premium. It is just part to good health benefits. And so I would hope that we can do that because I know as a business owner, I see how my team's adopted the telemedicine and they love it. They love it. I mean, families that are at home and difficulty getting out when you got, single parent households or, working parents on the road. What are you going to do at 10 o'clock at night? Right. So I think it's made a huge movement. So now it's kind of like adopting number 3 because mental health was going to be that challenge as we were in the 2021 year. And what do you think? We all said it was going to happen. Do you feel that, because I think for me, I felt that as the year was progressing on, that potentially we were all hopeful that COVID would start to dissipate and we would get back to our normal lives, but it didn't. So how did it impact the mental health space?
Yeah, it's interesting, like from an industry perspective, the studies I've seen so far is areas like the prescription drug side. Like if we can look for indicators, that validate, what we're hearing in the media, because there's been plenty of studies of surveying Canadians who have said, my mental health is worse, however that's defined, right, through COVID, some more than others. And I think individual circumstance and community and family network and all those things importantly play into that, as well as support from their employer, let alone specifically their benefits plan. But on the drug side, there's been a number of studies showing anywhere from about sort of a 20 to 30% increase in the number of plan members who are now using some kind of mental health medication as to before COVID started, right? So that is a lead indicator that people are, self-identifying, let's say, an issue, and for good or bad, the drugs is sort of typically the first therapy, because if you present to your GP, which is notionally what they're doing, and say like, I'm suffering, et cetera, and no criticism of GPs, they just don't have necessarily good line of sight to other resources. But the typical instinctive response is to write a prescription, right? And we'll talk later in the 22 prediction, I think, about where I think there's some interesting opportunities using data and technology to deliver more fulsome solutions to plan members. The one thing I will say, at least on our block and any other reading I've done, so just for context, when I say our block, we administer about a little north of 3,000 programs in a plan we call Benepac. And Empire Life is our disability provider. So just literally yesterday, we were having our quarterly meeting with them and get updates on trends and disability incidents and all this sort of thing. And a slight uptick in disability incidents. What's interesting is we haven't seen any explosion, in fact, minimal growth in terms of the percentage of those claims that are for mental health conditions, which is interesting. So we've got more people notionally getting medications, but let's assume, but they're working, presumably at some diminished capacity. But for the most part, they're not presenting yet as, disabled, let's say. I do think, and again, I'm no clinician, that may be a long tail issue with COVID. And there's also concerns of things like, cancer would be another example, one where this sort of pent up claims, because unfortunately with COVID, people have not been seeking, treatment or diagnosis, et cetera. So that could be another looming. Nobody knows for sure, but there's a sense of that, I would say.
Yeah. And I'll agree. And then, it actually is covering off a few of your other predictions, because as you talk about that, I think about, because what you're seeing, we're seeing on the benefit lines, when we're going through reviews with our clients, it's the first kind of the site, because right now, when you talk about this war on talent, I say, among other things, but one of the big things you need to focus on as an organization is you need to be really mindful of developing a well workplace, a well culture. And you can't just throw it out there. You need to act and work and participate in it and really have a conversation around it, because we are seeing definitely an increase in trends with our paramedicals, right? Psychologists, counselors. We've got EAP, right? Employee assistance programs. We're seeing that, certainly taking, a little bit higher of a usage pattern. And this is good, because it's telling us that they're wanting to act on it, right? And to the drug plan, yes, we see more times than not, we're going to see antidepressants, anxiety in one of the top 10 drugs on it. So when I pair all those together, I said, you know what, there's your evidence that this is something that's important. And if you want to be that organization that delivers that message that you care, you need to act on these things that we're seeing and showing you right now. And you know what, our client base is really good to say, that's the movement, and I believe in it, and we need to do it. So I think there's a lot to be said. The one thing I like about the telemedicine as it relates to the mental health space, and again, it goes back to being able to do this virtually, and cognitive behavior therapy. A lot of people would think that you couldn't get accurate or good therapy virtually. And yet I'm hearing, and you're probably seeing it no different than the physio, is that there's that constant touch, that constant reminder. So you're never disconnected. You're always staying connected to it. And I think it allows, maybe call a little bit of homework that, the employee has to do, but it does make a difference in terms of their ability to get healthy again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting about all these things, whether in the mental health space or otherwise, it's the sort of expansion of access, right, for plan members. Certainly when we're in the peak of COVID and there's the health concerns of physically going to a practitioner, regardless of what he or she does, that's one thing. But now imagine where, COVID's less of an issue, and that I think still having that flexibility for plan members will be important. Sometimes it's also going to be because they're in a remote area where the physical access to those practitioners is limited, or it means a 100-kilometer drive in a snowstorm, right? Kind of thing. Well, that's not optimal. But I think you'll also find that there'll just be preferences for plan members. Like an interesting one that we saw, again, this is my old person kind of, really? People want to do this? Okay. And it's in the mental health side. So there's a program called Beacon. So a disclaimer, Green Shield is our major partner for health and dental, and they have a partnership, if not maybe even ownership now, but a program called Beacon. So imagine this. So one of the challenges you get with mental health is most benefit plans, as you know, Deb, have paramedical coverage, including psychology, counseling, et cetera. It's also a very expensive service, right? And it's, if you have the typical, say, $500 per year per person, you might run out of that benefit in 3 visits, right? And 3 visits often is not, what's needed to help the individual. And there may be other solutions, employee assistance programs or otherwise. But so what Beacon was addressed to do is to provide a full course of treatment for that sort of $500, right? But what's interesting is how it's delivered. It's done through, if my understanding is correct, texting. So you're not even doing this. So imagine you're my counselor, which could be really interesting. So we're not even doing this. It's all being done through a text-based kind of approach with some, positive results. And again, but this goes back to my point of, if that's the preference for the individual and the efficacy, like if the effectiveness works, is that a bad thing? Especially if it allows for lower cost of delivery and that full course of treatment. The last piece that was interesting on this, because Green Shield's been running it long enough to get some data, you'd think, if I asked you, said, okay, what do you think would be sort of the employee cohort or demographic that would gravitate towards that?
I would think the millennials.
Right. And some of them did, but their biggest group was more in the 40 somethings.
No way.
Who were using that service. Yeah. Which was interesting. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, sometimes it makes it easier to have a conversation by having that a bit of distance, as long as we are, because we also know there's an art in, having a conversation by texting, chatting, right? I mean, in terms of how you deliver, right? So I can only tell you right now that, I practice a lot because I have 4 children, but 3 daughters, and you have to be thinking and very mindful how you say something. Right? But that's a good practice to have. And if we can use that as a way to reach people and have a conversation, I mean, because, especially COVID, yep, getting together person to person is a difficulty and the anxiousness of doing that. But it's just even getting some people to the counselor. Forget COVID, just getting them in front of somebody is difficult in itself. So I think the other tools that we can bring to the table, really, and it addresses another one of your points, because insurers the entire business community and the community, really talking about diversity and inclusivity when it comes to benefit programs and otherwise, because how do you adapt in ways that you can reach and be inclusive? And equitable, right? And in such a diverse community that we are in. So what are some things that you're seeing that the insurance companies are recognizing in this space?
Yeah, I'd say it's just starting. And I'd be curious on your take too. Like if we rewound the clock a year or more ago, I couldn't even probably spell DEI, right? So in terms of how often did you hear
it's a mouthful, right?
Yeah. And I think especially in more that sort of small mid-size employer space, I suspect if you're in those, bigger organizations with larger HR departments, they probably had a little more line of sight to this. And so back to your question though, about what does it look like in terms of benefits programs? And again, I'd say this year we've been more in building awareness and having some conversations, as opposed to, for the most part, sort of executing on any like plan design changes that align with that. Because as you would know, it requires conversations with customers and employers about, what is their philosophy and belief system, et cetera. But, as an example, let's take something like obesity, right? Which is a big challenge in terms of healthcare costs, et cetera, right? And I think it would be fair to say that a lot of people's perceptions of obesity historically has been, well, that's your fault, right? You have no self-control, et cetera, and, dismissing any sort of medical issues around it, right? But there's very good research now that would say in many cases, that's not true. Right. We all have to take some level of personal responsibility, but, so and then you go to the drug plan and you say, okay, so for that individual who is really challenged with that situation, and that also, as we all know, leads to potentially other health costs, whether diabetes or cholesterol or whatever, do they have access to whether drug therapies or other medical therapies that would help to alleviate that? And historically, the answer has been no. Right. Instead, they end up with various chronic conditions that end up being managed by other elements of the plan, but it's a sort of a stasis thing, not sort of an improving. And I would say more, both insurers and employers are coming around to this notion of, could that in fact be a very worthwhile investment? And then you also get into this interesting conversation about sort of public-private responsibilities in these areas, which is always a bit of a dynamic, because arguably, if you can help that individual lead a healthier life, a lot of the benefits downstream may accrue to the public healthcare system. But I think we're also, I'm sort of segueing a bit, at our peril, do we spend too much time worrying about that versus just helping the individual? Like if an employer said, well, I don't see the point in putting money into that because it's all going to benefit the public healthcare system and not me as a private employer. I think that's a risky perspective, because the reality is it benefits the individual, and they're healthier and more engaged and more productive, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a very positive thing.
Yeah. And it's very much what we speak and our values, because we really talk about a holistic approach, right, to an overall healthier bottom line. What does that mean? I mean, it means many things in today's world. It means mentally, physically, and we'll talk a little bit about financially. We need to bring them all together, and we need to come up with the approach to really have an acceptance to understand the importance of this. And then to bring the tools to the table. So when you ask, what is it, the benefit space is doing, it's yes, it's a beginning conversation. It's very much out there, but it's like, now how do we move this into a tangible opportunity? And I would think, a couple of things that I'm seeing that probably are helping us out is definitely virtual has helped with that inclusivity, right? We're dealing with remote, we're dealing with people that are, a distance, language barriers, having the ability to have that connection and be able to connect it through, the ability to have interpretation, or not interpretation, but be able to communicate it in the language that they need to. The other thing is, when we talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about later, is flexibility, health spending accounts. So now you're able to adopt some things that would be very, very important to you individually versus the lion's share of the people. And I think, because that spending accounts and wellness accounts are very liberal in nature, right? Because we look at benefits as very traditional and it's a defined benefit. This is a way in which we can adapt to people's needs. It's not 100%, it still needs fixing and growing, but I think we're on to at least a good start to be able to bring a little bit of that inclusivity into the benefits program.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One thing, just to go back to a comment you made a few minutes ago about sort of the employer having a sort of wellness philosophy, and treating the plan member, too much insurance lingo, the employee, more holistically, as it were. One thing, can I try sharing a little visual that's
absolutely
would validate that? Because I think it gives a good business argument for employers as well as to why it's important to invest in these things. Let's see if this works. So tell me if you can see that. Can you see that? Is that showing up on your screen?
Yes, it is. Yep.
So there's for us benefit geeks, there's a program. It's changed to Benefits Canada. It used to be called the Snowfee Healthcare Survey, that's been conducted for probably well over a dozen years. And this is from their most recent one this year's. But it's really interesting. So what they did is, if you have an organization, however they measure this, that has a culture of wellness, and then how does that impact employees' perceptions of other important things, such as, are they satisfied with their job? And we won't go into like, is this just correlated or is it causality? I'd like to think there is some causality to this, that where an employer has this wellness culture. And now we go back to, as we'll be talking about more, the sort of war for talent aspect, right? And you think about, this falls more into the retention side, but and also things like the perception of the benefits program. And I think that's very much linked, because presumably some of that wellness culture piece is coming from the benefits offering. So they're going to appropriately have a higher perception. And also, there's a noticeable difference in terms of how they rate their own personal health. So I'd like to believe that the employer's philosophy and actions in creating a wellness culture is actually leading to some of those better health outcomes as well. So just interesting in terms of sort of, the business argument for having a wellness culture as well. So
Yeah, you know what? Absolutely. I know when I did a presentation for the Pension Benefits Association, I referred to some of the stats in the healthcare survey, and I love that stuff because, to your point, I mean, I'd like to think that we can talk about common sense says, if we do this, this is what we'll get. This will be the positive outcome of it. And then everybody says, show me the numbers, show me, right? And I'm going, so there's still a little bit of that, but when we can actually, you know, kind of talk about it on a common sense level, I think that, you know, brings the practicality into it. So if we can combine both conversations, I mean, hopefully what we'll be able to do is move this message even much faster. And I know that, you know, like people, especially with, you know, the whole conversation around wellness, when you think about the working population, I mean, right now, 50% of the working population, Canadian working population, is millennials, right? In 2025, which is only 3 years away, it's going to be 75%. And who is driving this message? I mean, we all are, I am, but they're definitely driving this wellness message. That's why they're really moving towards this flexible spending wellness approach, because they're saying, I need the tools to stay healthy. I want to stay healthy. I don't want to rely on a 100% drug plan. I want actually not to rely on the drug plan. I would want to stay healthy. So when you're out there and you're looking to attract and retain talent, and 50 to 75% are going to be them, right? And I say that because I got 4 millennials as children. We need to adapt to account for that. Still provide, you know, a core plan to take care of, you know, the traditional marketplace. But this piece is running very quickly. And the good news is we'll all benefit from it. All of us will benefit. We're not doing it just to service them. We're doing it to service us as a working population and as citizens and as a community. So it's good to see that this is a prediction and this is a reality that comes up every year. So we're going to close off the 2021 because we've touched on a lot. We talked the whole data, like technology. We know that that's a space that's continuing to grow. You well know from the providers that you work with, man, every time I turn around, there's just somebody's doing it like a fresher approach, much more automated, much more tech savvy, and that's the space we're in. There's definitely big competition when you're working with providers and products and insurers, that they have that back end to better service us, to better service our clients. So we'll leave that because that'll come into 2021. So 2022, we touched on some of these. Number one, we said, obviously, COVID was here and it is here to stay. It might dissipate. We might not see much of it, but it definitely has impact in terms of how we act and think and grow as a community and utilize the resources around us and the importance of it. Because within that, we talked about telehealth or telemedicine, plan design changes. We touched a little bit on that. We said, you know, some of the things that we're going to see is what are those tools and resources that we're going to have to bring to the table, particularly in the mental health space. Disability will have a little bit impact, but to your point, not, which is a good thing, not as high as we had anticipated. If you remember at the beginning of 2021, we were getting a lot of really weird renewals with really high increases on these benefits, because what they were thinking is that, oh my gosh, is going to come fast and furious and we're not going to be able to keep up with these claims. So it is still there, but not to the degree. So I believe that they've kind of backed off a little bit and hopefully worked on the tools.
Yeah, I think the jury's out on that one still, because as I say, again, this isn't a doom and gloom prediction. I don't think, we just don't know, but you know, so again, our block, I can't say for sure is our block parallel to the larger industry experience, right? But that there will be some called pent up demand, for lack of a better, you know, I think it falls into 2 main buckets. One is those unfortunate situations where people have, you know, cancer or otherwise, but real health issues that are going to lead to disabilities that are being delayed because of access.
That's a great point.
And just not being diagnosed yet because they're like, I don't want to go to the doctors because there's COVID floating around out there or what have you. Or even just the ability, like we've all heard the stories of individuals whose non-COVID important health treatments are being delayed because of just access. And that will cause some increase in disability. And then the other one is the big mental health bucket again, in terms of just, you know,
and maybe call it a little bit of a lag, because exactly, like I know I just read a stat about it's always been an issue, but diabetes. Like it's climbing very quickly because there's a lot of moving parts to managing and assisting someone, even on a diabetic level. And if those services aren't available or there's reservations to go through the proper steps to better manage it at the onset, then it will have repercussions later.
Yeah,
right?
and we know at a macro level, physical health has suffered during COVID, right? I'm not saying everybody, but generally more sedentary. Where I was on the news this morning again, and the alcohol consumption one, like if I'm being honest, Tuesday is my recycling day at home, and it's a very embarrassing morning as you hear all the bottles smashing going into them. But anyway, that's how,
if it's any consolation, I'm in the same boat because I just talked to one of the not-for-profit organizations in Saskatchewan, and they actually, you can sign up and they will come get your bags of so you can hide them behind the recycling bin, and then you can walk away and they'll come get them for you.
It might be worth for them to make the drive to Coquitlam, just saying.
Maybe, exactly. Well, and then we look at, things like sleep apnea, like anxiety, right? I mean, the sleep apnea is another moving one that's creating, and people need sleep. Our lifestyles are built around, healthy habits, and sleep is a big one. So if we can't get proper sleeps, on comes the other one. So again, it's really to have that awareness, I think, to be personal awareness, to say, am I in a good space today? And where am I falling off? Right. And getting into that gray zone. And as an organization, to have that conversation and support the employees and their families, because it's not just about the employees, it's about the families as well. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So yes, I believe that COVID's going to have a lot of, there's good, bad, and it allows us to maybe grow into spaces that we never thought, or escalates the way we move into these spaces. Vaccinations, I know we get a lot of conversation around the vaccinations, how and what, and if it's impacting the benefit program and what's covered, what's not. Are you getting any kind of weird and strange questions?
For them, not so much on the vaccine, since that ends up being mostly a public healthcare issue. I would say if there's an area that touches that, it's more on travel than anything else, which of course our government yesterday said don't travel, and understand why. Just sort of, so if you are going to a sunny destination or what have you, is, that's the sort of customer service questions we get. Like, if something happens to me COVID related while I'm in Mexico or whatever, will I be covered? And so, as you would advise, well, you would actually advise them directly, but would be, check your contract, because, it's not necessarily the same answer from provider to provider.
Yeah, we had an interesting question yesterday. Workers' compensation, which I actually didn't know this was the situation, is that there was coverage for people that were caring, if they got COVID as a result of caring for somebody who had COVID.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Now, again, we're just kind of investigating it, but then apparently workers' compensation says we are no longer going to do that. So the question came back to us on the benefit side going, so what happens if I'm caring for someone who's got COVID and I get COVID? Right. Am I covered on the benefit program? Right. Yeah. And it comes back to the medical questionnaire.
Yep.
Right. Are you disabled? So there's nothing that changes in the contract, but certainly a good reminder to send back to, our clients to say, if this becomes a situation, we need to be reminded that disability benefits are going to be provided if you can medically qualify based on the definition. Right.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too, Deb, is when we were having this conversation with Empire yesterday, and, you have the financial and the stats and all that stuff that we've talked about. But, because one of the other predictions is sort of that future of work environment, so for the most part, a little dependent on industry, but like I'll use our organization, like when this all started, not quite 2 years ago, we sent everybody home, right? And for the most part, we're still at home. Like our largest office is in Kingston, Ontario, which is unfortunately what's considered a red zone right now. They've just had worse outbreaks. So, discretion and safety, work from home, et cetera. But now think about, when you look to manage things like disability claims, if you're the risk provider, the insurer, in the past, that dynamic was always, the employer completes their part, the employee completes their part, and usually some medical practitioner, depending on the nature of the claim, does their part, right? So in the past, especially for the employer piece, you probably had more direct line of sight to the employee. So now when the home becomes the work environment, right, whether it's for ergonomic issues or other things, how does that change the dynamic of how disability claims are managed? And the answer is it does, but there isn't an easy answer to that.
No, and it's a conversation that I think to some degree worries people, because as we start to move more into this space and start to see kind of the outcome of what's happening and what side of the fence does this belong to, I guess, call it that, because I mean, you even think about how that's going to impact, like whether it's through workers' compensation or even our benefit programs, is ergonomically working from home, right? I mean, that we know we're getting disabilities as a result of not being ergonomically set up to work from home. And, so now that even weighs into the employer side, that where does the responsibility come in terms of making sure that workplace is a workplace that is worthy of working in, right? And if you don't, and if the, the people working from home aren't cognizant of how important that is, it's just going to create other issues, right?
Right.
So number one, we did COVID. Number two was, we've talked a lot about the mental health crisis. We know that this is something that's not going away. There was a quick, and I'm just going to say quick ad. I know you and I talked very quickly. We talked about, it does come up, not often. There was when legalization of cannabis came into our space a couple of years back, we thought, oh my gosh, like we pivoted and we changed. And I mean, there is a way to embrace, medical cannabis for the people that feel that this is the route to go. Spending accounts, health spending accounts, and certainly there is a line that you could add to your health benefit program. But to your point, Mike, I've had an inquiry, but we've never had an uptake on it. So question will be whether or not that will be a conversation going forward. Maybe that'll be into the 22-23 predictions of that. So we talked about number three, increased long-term disability incidences in terms of just kind of where we might see some of that going. So that's, it's certainly something to watch for. Hopefully we're aware of it right now so we can best manage it so that we can minimize that incident rate. Number four, we talked a little bit around costs of services, inflation and cost of services. I know that we're getting, with the change of COVID and the need to be staying very safe in that environment, there's cost to it on every level of business. And now we're seeing it obviously on the claim side when it comes to renewals, because cost of service have gone up. So are you getting conversation around that a little bit?
Oh yeah. And as you know, forever and a day that we've been in this business, there's inflation, right? There's discussions between customer, advisor, and insurer generally of what the appropriate number is, but that's a different conversation. I think, there's elements of where you want to make sure your adjudicator, which is generally going to be the insurer, has appropriate cost controls, and that's a whole other larger conversation. But, so you take something like massage as an example, make sure there are like certain limitations and what generally are called reasonable and customary built into the plan. And that's always a balancing act between one of my favorite industry acronyms. As you know, Deb, our industry has way too many acronyms, but I remember one time being in a presentation and the person said, in the nature of this type of conversation, well, it's good to have all these cost controls in there, but you always have to be balancing that against the PMPOF. And this was a room full of industry folks, and you can hear them murmuring like, I thought we knew what that. And he said, it's the plan member piss off factor. But that's a real thing, right? Like if you take it too far and you just have, then the plan members or the employees are at HR's door all the time going, this plan sucks, and you don't want that, right? I'd say the other piece that probably ties into this, and you've alluded to this before, is sort of the flexibility piece, and when it comes to certain elements of traditional plans, so this again is a health and dental conversation, we are seeing that trend towards flexibility. So flexibility, whether through a health spending account or wellness or otherwise, it doesn't just create that sort of customization ability. I think the other interesting part is it makes people better consumers of their plan.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you have more line of sight to kind of spending your own dollars.
Mhm.
right? When it's the traditional defined benefit route, and it doesn't make employees bad, but I think there's this mentality of other people's money. Like they don't connect the dots that it's actually their money, right? And compensation. But when it's a finite bucket of money, you behave differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I know we tried to in a very simplistic layman's version, when we're doing employee meetings, we want to put that correlation between claims drive premium, which means it doesn't matter whether you pay or don't pay, indirectly you pay as an employee, right? Whether it's through, compensation is not maybe increasing to the level you'd want, maybe the bonuses aren't there, and on and on. So we really want people to identify. So yes, flexible spending accounts will be, it is like, this is the deal. You got X dollars, you spend it, it's done, right? And I think we have to continue to educate. And I know that we've had people come back and say, my cost of massage went up. Why is my benefit program going up? And, I had to help them through the math. We can do that. We can double this if you really wanted to. But if I double it, that means this is what happens to the premium, this is what impacts you and how it impacts you. So it's like a aha moment where they sit back going, okay, I better. So really, when we talk about, benefits, the need to communicate and better yet educate is really, it's in high demand, because we need to have them on side. Right? We need to have them understand how they can be better consumers and have better spending habits. So I do believe that the spending account has a lot of advantages, and one of them will be that education piece that has that level of ownership, that they need to be much smarter with their decisions on that. So, and that will play into, even just the cost of like drugs. It's like, managing their health. And if they're not managing their health, comes at a cost, right? Whether I was excited when I had someone I knew very well, he had COVID, was a little bit too generous on the snacks, and his weight went up, therefore his high blood pressure, and he was on high alert for diabetes, right?
Right. Yep.
Now down to business, that made sure that he took his health to task, and proud to say he's off that medication, because again, if we can do that indirectly, we're going to support managing costs on a go forward as well. So number 6, competitive job market will lead to continued hiring and staffing challenges. Obviously, this plays into, and we'll announce our next speaker. We certainly see that's impacting the benefit space as well. Do you agree?
Yep, no, 100%. And I think, back to that whole war for talent thing, and again, I'll try to avoid being political here. I did notice one thing that was interesting, you may have. So I guess when the government came out about a week ago with the November jobs numbers federally, it was big fanfare, huge growth in, jobs in Canada, which was true. A lot more people returned to the job market. But I also don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the government support programs, albeit important and necessary before that, were wound up in October. So I think there was this, I have to go back to work kind of sentiment now. Now that I don't think will, instantly solve this sort of like lack of talent, because we read a very good article in the Globe sometime in the last year, and certainly an area that's been highlighted in terms of lack of available resources is the service sector, restaurants, et cetera, right? And this lady who was a previous server wrote a very intelligent article about, they're not being judgy here, but I think for a lot of people, that sort of occupation is often transitional, right? Like whether they're in school or working towards another career, et cetera. And I think what COVID did, and this is what happened to her, because she had been a server for many, many years, and then she got sidelined, and then she had some support through government. She took that as the opportunity to then actually go and notionally follow her dream. And she's a writer now, et cetera. So there have been a lot of people, I think, in certain industry sectors like that, who have now permanently left that channel. Right. So that I don't have the solution of, how restaurants solve that short term. It's
a big concern. We've got a lot of clients in the hospitality, the retail, on the tourism space, and it's definitely a challenge in their space. And I love this stat, and you probably read it, because Positive Benefits Canada. And, people always think, where do benefits play a part in this? And 68% of the working Canadian population would rather have a good job with benefits versus a job with greater pay, right? And so there is a space for benefits. There's absolutely a space. There's another stat, ironically, the number's the same, 68% said, had I not had a benefit program, I would have been that much more stressed because I had needed to rely on the benefit program. And
Right.
had I not had that, my level of stress would have gone up even more. So it does put us in a good place on the benefit side of things because it's a huge part of rewards and compensation. So there's an integration that needs to happen. We need to talk to the HR space. And as Hanifa Mani would say, yes, pay is important. But you can't be racing to pay the highest dollar because essentially that's just a race to the bottom. You need to be looking at these other pieces that come to the table. And that will be our speaker next month, which we'll formally do. So there is a way to incorporate benefit programs as a really, really helpful and useful tool to help your employees and to help you as an employer, obviously. So
yeah, well, I think it's you said something there. It's that sort of total rewards and compensation that's becoming more important. I think again, it's weird to say benefit of COVID, but so be it, has been that employees have seen an increased value in their benefits programs where they have it. And if they don't have it, may become a priority in terms of who they choose from an employer standpoint. But as you know, that total rewards goes well beyond the benefits program. Like it links into that. Again, this will be industry specific, but what flexibility does my employer provide today, but more importantly in the future in terms of maybe where I can do my work from? This whole conversation about hybrid offices, home, et cetera. So it's very clear from the statistics that, plan members, employees in the future in a post-COVID environment, will want that flexibility, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And the one piece that we seem to miss, which is huge because we talk about overall holistic health and overall healthier bottom lines. And what's the biggest stressor when it comes to mental well-being is financial. So when you talk about war on talent, it's the deal breaker. And we've seen it, right? Is that, I was at the table, we were signing the papers, the questions come up on benefits, the question comes up for retirement programs, done deal, right? So it's just, and again, if we want to be, as an employer, trying to do our best to attract that great talent and keep it, these are the pieces we need to be thinking about now as we move forward. And you mentioned that in one of your predictions that in 2022, there's gonna be a lot more conversation around financial tools and wellness tools, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and number one, that same survey we talked about before, the Benefits Canada one. So it was number one in 2020 and it was number one in 2021. So source of employee stress, financial tops the list in both years.
Huge, absolutely. And you know what, number 10, we're going to close off, but we did talk about it. The need for new technologies, right? We're seeing in our space. I mean, can you remember back in the days where everything was done paperwork, everything. And now it's, it's, and I mean, in any professional industry, we all said, oh, it has to be official in writing with pen in hand, and gone are the days, right? And the technology to back up, some of the product lines that are out there have to move very, very swiftly to be able to keep up with the competition going forward.
For sure. Well, I'm going to need those services to cure my tequila-induced mechanical bull injuries. So there you go.
You and me both. I had a couple close calls on Falls. I did talk, and I don't know if Tracy's, but I just see her on Facebook, and she's full on cast from above the knee down, and she slipped going on a walk, and I went, oh, this is like no. But anyways, that's a wrap. Like, we went through a lot of information. I know it's a conversation I love to have with my clients because they're always really wanting to know going forward, what are you seeing? And those predictions, I would like to come back to those predictions, Mike, in terms of 2022. And I think we should do a refresher. And
let's make this an annual thing, Deb, and then we'll see how much was right. And I'll leave you with the final prediction, because just in case any of my wife or her family's up, but Saskatchewan will win the Grey Cup next year. How's that?
Oh, I would hope so. I I want to be able to cheer for them, that's for sure. So, well, thank you very much, Mike. It was a pleasure to have you on our show. I think there was lots of information shared. I mean, we're available to the audience for any questions that you might have. And we would like to, again, bring this conversation back just to see what's happening. It's a conversation that carries on month to month. It's not like we talk about it next year. We'll see the progression of it, but we'll do a wrap up for sure. So thank you again, Mike, for coming up and joining us. I want to do one last shameless plug for the Care for Kids Christmas gift, the gift of love. Do buy tickets to come to the event. They'll have a ton of fun. You'll support anybody who's touched by children, whether it's your own children, grandchildren, cousins, nieces, nephews. Fantastic charity to definitely support the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital. Next month, in January 20th, we are going to take this to the next level. We'll talk about that war on talent, that shortage of labor, and what businesses are having to do to pivot and adapt to the new business space. And we'll have Hanif Hamani from Express Employment as our guest speaker. I'm excited to say that there'll be the ability to get professional development credits for that, for those in the HR space that are going to join us. Definitely a highlight conversation that we seem to be having on a very regular basis, and it's not going to go away anytime quickly. So I hope that you are able to come and join us next month and have some conversation with Hanif as well. So to that, I will end with, have a wonderful, wonderful Merry Christmas. Do stay healthy, do stay safe, and absolutely try your best to have a restful holiday season. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again, Mike. It was a pleasure.
It says Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Deb.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.